In Essential Task 6.7, we are briefly going to talk about biological sex and then gender differences. This is a good example of one of those topics at the end of a unit where the topics are definitely related, but not perfectly related like some of the earlier concept maps, but it's the end of the unit and we do need to kind of add a bunch of smaller topics together. So again, we're going to talk about biological sex, gender, and then also include sexual orientation. The concept map is only the 3 boxes that you see here. I have horizontal up, but you could very easily hold this vertically as well. But I'll allow you to pause the video now before proceeding into the concept map. We'll start all the way on the left and talk about biological differences between males and females and just acknowledge some terminology which could conceivably appear on the AP exam. And that's the difference between what are called primary sex characteristics and then secondary sex characteristics. The anatomical body structural differences between males and females that are necessary for the process of reproduction. So I'm talking about things like ovaries and testes are developed during prenatal development. So this is primarily one of the ways you can determine the gender of your child during pregnancy. But these body and anatomical structural differences are classified as primary sex characteristics. So anything that is explicitly necessary for reproduction is classified as a primary sex characteristic. On the other hand, everything else that differentiates males from females in terms of voice, in terms of body hair, in terms of breasts, in terms of muscle growth, in terms of hips widening, basically every other non-reproductive trait that differentiates males from females is going to be classified as a secondary sex characteristic. And you can really identify these primary and secondary sex characteristics as people experience puberty because a lot of the secondary sex characteristics are a byproduct of hormone changes. So whether it's estrogen or testosterone level changes, when an individual undergoes puberty, these secondary sex characteristics are way more pronounced. To proceed onward, talking a little bit now about the concept of gender. So not quite just biological sex, male versus female. Gender is the social expectations of what it means to be feminine or masculine. And that can vary depending on time period. That can vary depending on culture as well. So it's whatever the society subscribes to in terms of the definition of feminine versus masculine. And when a society has a well-defined expectation of feminine or masculine, we see a lot of gender typing occur. Gender typing is the process by which an individual acquires the characteristics that are typical for the definition of masculine or feminine. And you can see this played out in a lot of different contexts. Like, for example, although Toys R Us is now defunct, when you go back and look at old Toys R Us ads, as we actually did in this unit, you'll notice a very clear color scheme between toys designed for females and toys designed for males. You'll notice sort of the blue tint in both of these. You'll also notice the toys are geared towards behaviors and stereotypes associated with males and females. Notice the child over here is playing with tools. The girl over here is playing with a vanity. You notice the child down here is playing with science. That sort of perpetuates a stereotype in the STEM field. You'll notice the girl over here is playing with dolls in a dress. The toys that are geared towards and advertised towards, whether it's males or females, are very clearly based on the cultural expectations of what it means to be masculine or feminine. The process by which a child undergoes, whether it's seeing what their parents do, going to Toys R Us, watching movies, watching TV shows, the process by which a child acquires what's called a gender role is the process known as gender typing. Gender typing, the process of acquiring the stereotypes of male or female, leads to the formation of what are called gender roles, which are societal expectations about what males and females do that are unique to their gender. I've tried to pick some more innocent ones, not to perpetuate any gender stereotypes, but perhaps males initiating the first date, females selecting wedding gifts. Obviously, I could list a variety of stereotypes pertaining to males and females, but I'm going to try not to perpetuate any of those. But if you list out the variety of gender roles that exist, all of those are probably in some capacity a result of gender typing which occurred. And again, whether that was when a child watched a movie or a TV show or went to a toy store, there are certain cultural expectations about the definition and characteristics of feminine and masculine behaviors that are often acquired and are resulting in what are called gender roles. The last box to talk about is to acknowledge some of the science pertaining to homosexuality and sexual orientation in general. Decades ago, there was a myth or a belief that a life event could cause someone to shift from heterosexual to homosexual, but there's been really no science to back that up. Research has been conducted to potentially look at parental relationships and the connection to homosexuality. There's no evidence there. There was a belief that maybe children underwent childhood trauma that could somehow cause them to change their sexual orientation. There's no evidence there for that either. Maybe fear of the other gender. There really is no evidence to suggest that something in your environment, something that, that you live through, could cause homosexuality. On the other hand, what research does suggest is there's potential for genetic influence, meaning that we actually inherit our sexual orientation through genetics. If you look at studies on identical twins, which is indicated here in this final portion of the concept map at the top of this graph, you'll notice the likelihood of identical twins sharing a homosexual sexual orientation is actually quite high. There's about a 50-50 chance that if one identical twin is homosexual, that the other identical twin is also going to be homosexual. And what's really important here is when you look at fraternal twins, you'll notice that the numbers drop off to under 20, if not 20%. That's a big deal. Again, identical twins have the same genetics, exact same genetics. Fraternal twins have about 50-50 in terms of genetic similarity. So obviously not as much as identical, but not nearly as much as just two random people. The likelihood of two random people both being homosexual is quite low. But you notice this clear drop-off between identical and fraternal twins relative to just random people on the streets, suggesting that this really high similarity, which we call heritability between identical twins, suggests that sexual orientation, just like a lot of other behaviors and character traits, are, as is the case indicated here, a byproduct of genetics. So in terms of what the evidence suggests from a modern context, there's really no evidence that there's an environmental cause for your sexual orientation, and quite a bit more evidence to suggest that it actually could just be a byproduct of genetics.